All right. Good, good afternoon now. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us today. We'll get started now, I think, because we're right on 12:30 Japan Standard Time. My name is Aiden. If you're in the session before, you will already know me, but my name is Aiden Lukes. My pronouns are he, him, and my role is as an Asia Pacific lead at the Migration Youth and Children platform. And I would like to say on behalf of the Migration Youth and Children platform, a big welcome to this roundtable entitled Youth Perspectives on Climate Migration in the Asia Pacific. We're very, very excited to have you here today. And essentially the focus of this session is going to be on getting your perspectives on the topic of climate migration in the Asia Pacific region, which we are hoping to feed into further advocacy work that we're doing at the Migration Youth and Children platform. Before we dive any deeper into today's discussion, I would just like to start with an acknowledgement of country from the lands which I usually reside on in Australia. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the Yugambeh language region and extend my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect as well to any Indigenous people joining on this call today. I would like to recognize the disproportionate impact that the climate crisis and climate migration has on Indigenous communities in Australia and around the world. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So as I said before, today's session is really focused on getting everyone involved into discussion and debate on the topic of climate migration in the Asia Pacific. So it would be amazing if you're comfortable with it to turn on your cameras because it's going to be a really interactive session. I of course understand not everyone's comfortable with that and that's totally okay. But if you are, definitely turn your camera on. It will be great to see all of your faces. And we will jump into the session. So the way that we're going to be running it today is I essentially have set up this Jamboard for our session and I'll share the link with you all. And the Jamboard is going to be a collaborative document that we can use to add sticky notes, add ideas, add illustrations all around our ideas and our perspectives on this topic. And the reason that we are conducting today's consultation is because we recognize that climate change is presenting migration challenges across the region. And if you were in the last session with me, you would know we dove a bit deeper into the nexus between climate migration and equity and the way that climate migration affects different groups across our society. But at the Migration Youth and Children platform, we really recognize that for far too long, young people's voices have not been amplified in this discussion. And this discussion as a whole around climate migration is often forgotten in international debates and perspectives on climate change as a whole. And so what we're really aiming to do with the series of consultations that we're running is being able to amplify youth voices because we recognize that young people are going to be disproportionately impacted by the climate crisis and climate migration in particular. And through our work with advocacy, awareness raising, and amplifying youth voices, we are working on including the findings at a COP27 side event, as well as into a future policy document or briefing to ensure that we can share the findings, and we'll make sure that everyone has access to that when that does get published. In terms of just some ground rules for today's consultation, in coming to today's session, you have provided consent to be recorded today and also to share your perspectives and for that to be shared with everyone else. If you don't feel comfortable consenting with that, just do ask that you leave the call because we want to make sure everyone's here freely and is feeling comfortable and has consented to participating. And we do also recognize that some of these topics can be a little challenging to discuss and can be distressing at times. So if you do find yourself feeling upset or distressed during the consultation or afterwards, please do reach out for support and we'll be able to point you in the best direction to ensure that we're able to address that if that does arise for you. So I think with that, we will dive right into the consultation and the first question that we have. So I will share the Jamboard link with you all now, and I'll just pop it into the chat. So if everyone wants to jump onto the Jamboard, you can be logged into your Google account or just without your login, and we will get started on our first question. So the first question is quite broad, but we want to really just start and get everyone thinking about what comes to mind when we say climate migration. And this can be as broad or as specific as you think. If there's something you're particularly passionate about or interested in, we want to hear all of those different thoughts. So the way we're going to do this is, if you see on this sort of side tab here, we're going to add sticky notes, and you can type in whatever your thoughts are. So you type your thoughts and then just click save at the bottom, and that will add that onto our Jamboard. So if everyone wants to take a few minutes to add some sticky notes onto the Jamboard, and then we will take some time to discuss it as a group and see what some of the key themes that we can come away with from this first question around what comes to mind when we say climate migration. Oh, it's on view only mode. Oh, okay, sorry, let me double check if I'll fix it. Editor. There we go. Can everyone access that properly now?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. So whenever you're ready, just popping your ideas onto a sticky note, and it doesn't have to be any sort of finalized ideas, just initial thoughts, anything that comes to mind initially, and then we're going to unpack those ideas a little further. Ooh, still do not have access to it. So if you're having trouble accessing the Jamboard, if you want to add your comments into the chat, and then I'll paste them into a sticky note for you, that would be amazing. All right, keep the ideas coming. We've got some fantastic sticky notes coming through. All right, these are excellent ideas. Thank you so much for your participation, everyone. And keep adding your ideas if you still have any more onto the Jamboard. And we'll start discussing some of the themes that we have up on the Jamboard at the moment. So I'm gonna, if people are comfortable, I'm gonna start to sort of talk about some of the key themes I'm seeing. And if you contributed to any of those sticky notes, please do let me know what you were thinking, what was your thought process behind those sticky notes. So I think one of the big ones that I'm seeing firstly is really around sort of conferences for climate change and organizations involved in this climate space. So we have Stockholm, we have COP27, Youngo, we have these sorts of themes. Does anyone who contributed to those sticky notes want to say what's their thoughts behind that? Is that around the advocacy? Is that around the need for a youth voice? What was your perspective there?
Yes, I was. Yeah, that's I posted once. Should I speak?
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I like to say that it's kind of also some. Actually, I was member of the Stockholm Plus 50 Youth Task Force as a member of the UNEP MGCY, maybe as you know. And the time I was attending to these kinds of the conferences and talking about the sessions. That time we need to setting up some inclusions for the decision-making process for the climate the mitigations and migrations and adaptations. So that's my thanks.
Okay, fantastic, excellent. And anyone else who also contributed to those sorts of themes around conferences, even things like Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, what was your thinking behind adding those? What was your thought process in relating that to climate migration? Was it the lack of inclusion of climate migration in those documents? Was it the need for more involvement in this space? What were you thinking?
It is kind of some Kyoto protocols. The first time to the COP third, they set up to some kind of protocol, but they did not include the more detailed information and measures for the climate mitigation and how to evaluate it for some effectiveness and the inclusions for any sectors. So that's why I added the Kyoto protocols and COP27. So that's my point.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And anyone else as well added to those points, or any other things to add on those sorts of themes? Not for that one. That's all good. Excellent. We'll move on to another sort of key theme from here that we can see. So I think another one we're kind of coming across is around agriculture. So agricultural stress on farmlands leading to urban migration. I'll pop that over there. We see as well here a lot of agricultural-based societies getting displaced since they're very reliant on farming, and land for that kind of activity has become limited. Urban overcarrying capacity too. So talking about migrating from maybe more regional areas into urban areas, we kind of see that emerging as a theme over here. Who was kind of adding those sticky notes, and did you want to speak more to what you were thinking in terms of this urban and regional tension and the agriculture intersection with climate migration?
I wrote the urban overcarrying capacity. So for the climate migration, when it comes to climate migrations, I thought about people who flee from their homeland to new countries or new regions or inside the country as well. But they tend to look to live in the city area where there's a lot of job opportunities for them, rather than their unlivable homeland. So it may create such a big stress for cities, because like public infrastructures can carry just such a number of population, and if there's a sudden wave of new migration to the city, it will cause a lot of problem, like environmental problems, social issues, and also a beautiful city may have the slums of homeless and also homeless people on the streets. So yeah, that's what I thought when it comes to climate migration.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So I think that's sort of what you're speaking to there, is that when we have climate migration occurring and people moving into more urban areas, that also has other ramifications for social issues and social problems in our societies. And that's certainly something we need to be exploring. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else on that topic as well? wanted to add anything?
This is sort of similar to what Dorothy said, but I also wrote about like the increase in migration to urbanized areas, and I had a specific sort of area in mind, which was sub-Saharan Africa. And from what I've read, a lot of the economies there are largely agriculture based. So when there's great like disaster having like events such as like floods or like heavy rainfall, there's a lot of like income shocks that like result from that, leading people to have to migrate outside of that area.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely fantastic. So again, talking to the sort of themes in a different regional context, though, on the sort of agricultural-based societies and the implications that climate migration can have in those contexts. Fantastic. Thank you so much for those contributions. I think as well, another sort of theme we're seeing here is around the impacts on mental health. So things like loss of cultural identity, we're seeing over here, loss of livelihood, great impacts on migrants' mental health, intergenerational impact too. I can't quite get it over into that corner, but we see intergenerational impact as well, and the hardship and danger of migration. So if you contributed to those sticky notes, did you want to speak to what was your thought process behind that? And what are your concerns in terms of mental health and livelihood?
Well, I added the loss of livelihood part because it's not just a matter of job, but also the environment in which I grew. And I know the opportunities that I had in the environment. And when I'm forced to leave, that part of, where I lived and where I grew, then there is this immediate erasure of all the things that I grew up to. And also, let's say that in India, the northeastern Indians, they are tribals, basically. Let's say they are forced to leave their place completely due to floods or landslides. Then that means that their entire cultural identity is being, somewhat put to, the sort of extinction kind of type of threat. So yeah, that's why I added both of those.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. Excellent. So I think we're seeing then as well that not only, as you mentioned, is it the sort of issues faced in terms of sourcing a new job, but there can also be such a strong sense of cultural loss experienced too, in terms of having to leave behind your community and the native lands that you're from, and the ways that can affect mental health and well-being as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, their language too. Let's say if I'm forced to move to some other area, then there is no more use of the language that I know. I will have to learn their language. So it's every bit of their cultural heritage. Yeah.
Absolutely. And please do keep that point in mind too for one of the later questions we have, because we want to explore solutions for these sorts of things like cultural loss. So that's a really fantastic point to bring up this early in the discussion. Thank you. Fantastic. Well, I think we obviously have quite a lot of other stickies here as well. We have livable land, needing to leave behind your home, displacement, internally displaced persons, countries moving their capitals. These are all really, really fantastic points to bring up. And I think it says a lot about how everyone on this call, in one way or another, does know about climate migration and knows that it's a pressing issue that we're facing in this time we find ourselves in. So I think that that's a really good way to start this discussion, is around seeing that young people recognize the stress and the dangers that people can experience during a climate migration process. So I think let's kind of lead that into now the second question, which we've talked now broadly about what comes to mind when we say climate migration. But what I would love, if you're comfortable sharing now, is for us to talk more about personal experiences or experiences of those people in our community, which we may know or represent, and their experiences with migration broadly, or your experiences with climate migration in particular. So I want you to reflect on this question. What have been your experiences with migration or climate migration? And for this activity, what I think would be very fun is if everyone wants to get a little creative. We have pens on the Jamboard on the side, so you can kind of do a little illustration, and you'll see on the next few slides, we have a couple of blank ones, and I'd love for you to pick one of the slides, and if you can illustrate in a few images what your experiences with migration or climate migration have been, that would be fantastic. And that can be positive experiences, negative experiences, really anything. And what we're going to do then, once we have those illustrations, is come back and talk about what the positives have been and how we can focus on making more people be able to experience that, and also what the negatives have been and how we can ensure we can find solutions to those problems when undertaking migration. So if you want to take a couple of minutes now and get your artistic skills going and add to any of the slides with that text on it, and then we will come back and discuss. These are some fantastic illustrations, everyone. Keep them coming, and just a few more minutes and we'll then start discussing them. All right, so keep drawing if you're still drawing. I don't want to stop your artistic expression. But those are really, really amazing. I love them. So this, what I want to do now is I'm gonna kind of point to some of the different illustrations. And if you are the person who drew it, I'd love if you could turn your microphone on if you're comfortable and just tell us a bit about what it is trying to represent, and how that relates to your experience in migration or people who you may be close to in your community. So we might start with this illustration on the top right hand on the first slide. Who drew this one?
I drew it, but Essentially, it sort of like pertains to my experiences. Younger, I was living in like rural Korea, and there's an instance where our house sort of flooded because of very heavy rainfall. So it was more like weather induced rather than climate induced. But essentially, when we tried to sort of get compensated for like the damage that the rainfall had done like to our flooring and everything, because our apartment was owned by like a really big like corporation with, you know, fantastic lawyers and everything, we had like really little legal protections. So it really made me think of the lack of protections like on the legal level that like climate migrants have, even though this is more pertaining to like weather-induced sort of migration. And the second picture is more relating to the enormous amounts of like air pollution that I've experienced in more urban areas. But yeah, that's sort of the thinking behind that drawing.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you very, very much for sharing that. I think those are two very, very salient points. So I think on the first one, as you were mentioning, the lack of legal protection, and particularly in relation to sort of damage and displacement in that situation, even if it was sort of a flooding and rain event, we see that with climate change, those massive rainstorms are occurring much more often and much more frequently. I know in Australia, for example, where I'm from as well, we see something quite similar. And we have issues in terms of insurance and protection and legal pathways to seek compensation. So that's a really incredible point. Thank you for sharing that. And again, as well, on the second point with the sort of health impacts really of climate change and pollution and those sorts of aspects. So that's fantastic. Thank you very, very much for sharing. Awesome. Okay, now let's look maybe down into the bottom left corner. So whoever was illustrating this one, did you want to tell us what were you thinking and what do these pictures represent?
Hello, I'm sorry for my bad writing drawing. I don't know if you can understand something from it, but I don't have a direct experience with climate migrations, but I have a lot of friends who experience climate migrations. So the story is they're living in the central part of Vietnam, the region where every year will be hit by a few storms, big storm, and they have to build and rebuild their house many times when living in that region. So they are very vulnerable to climate change, of course. So the story is the older generations, like parents who are also people who are over 40 years old, they will try to push their children to study harder, to get a good job, and to study harder to get into the university in the urban area, in the southern part of Vietnam. So even though they don't want to leave their town, their homeland, but they are pushed by their parents or grandparents to go to this big city to have a better life, instead of staying here and get your house destroyed by the flood or storm a few times per year. But the story hasn't ended there. So when those children, they come to, those children are my friends, they come to Hanoi, the biggest city in Vietnam, for having a better life. They have to experience air pollution in Hanoi, in the big city. So I feel like it's such a big hardship that young people in Vietnam like us have to experience. Like, it's such a dilemma. If they stay in their homeland, then yeah, flood and climate change, but go to city pollutions. So yeah, that's what I want to illustrate with my drawing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Dorothy. I think that's incredibly insightful, and sharing it from the perspective of young people in Vietnam in particular. Yes. That's really, really important to amplify. So thank you for that. I'm curious to know, do you think that from your discussions with people who have had this experience,
Mm.
what are the sort of, do you think it takes any sort of emotional toll on them in terms of the sort of potentially cultural loss in leaving their homelands, in leaving their families? Do you know anything about that sort of experience for them and maybe the mental or emotional impacts of that?
Yes, I do feel them because I lived with them for a few years when I'm in university. So the thing is, people in the central area of Vietnam, they speak different accents. Even though we use the same language, but their accent is so different that even people in northern area like me find it's so hard to understand them. So because they have to spend so much time in the northern area, they have to speak to adopt the accents of northern people. So sometimes they tell me that they miss using their accent so much that you feel so lonely there. So I think that's also a very big aspect of cultural loss, and I can feel them. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of then, I think bringing language into it and accents in the way that that forms part of our identity, but that with migration, that can be changed or erased in some situations.
Yes.
Absolutely. That is incredibly important to share. Thank you very much for that, Dorothy. And so I think there, everyone, what we've really seen is a very specific kind of regional impact of climate migration in Vietnam in particular. And so migrating from those central areas due to sort of climate related issues, but also facing new challenges in the new regions. And I think for me, that kind of speaks to the point where, you know, this issue is affecting all of us at the end of the day, and we can't necessarily continue to circle people around. We need to look for sustainable solutions for a way forward. So that's a really salient contribution. So let's see. Is this yours as well, Dorothy? All of the lower part? Just want to check.
Yeah, but someone drew the cough part. I think because it's related to my drawing, so I draw an arrow there.
Okay, fantastic. All right, let's see if we, okay, awesome, we have something here. So did someone who drew this one want to speak up and tell us what they were thinking here and the story behind this illustration?
That's my drawing. Excuse my bad drawing. I was going to talk about the nuclear power accident in Japan. Maybe you know it already. Even though I was not the one who evacuated from Fukushima, but I went there the other day, last Tuesday, I guess, in Fukushima, and I saw the area that are, which is called hard to get home area.
Mm-hmm.
And there, it's been 11 years since the accident, but still today, people can't get into the area because of the high radiation. And because of the accident of nuclear power plants in Fukushima, there was a high radiation around the area, and people had to people had to get out of the area, and they didn't have anywhere to go, but they had to. So many people went to Tokyo or around Tokyo because it's a city. And there they started their own lives. And now it's been 11 years and many people don't want to go back because many young people don't feel like it's the Fukushima itself is their hometown. It's been already 11 years. They feel like Tokyo or around Tokyo is already their hometown, and even though it started to allow for people to get back to the area, but not many people go there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing that perspective too. So I think what I'm hearing then in maybe the situation you have seen excuse me, in the situation you have seen play out is that there's maybe a sense of changing identity too, in that these young people don't feel that the area they had to leave is their home because they've been in Tokyo and the surrounding areas for so long. So do you think then that, do you think that speaks to maybe how climate migration can influence one's identity and sense of self?
I think so.
Okay, fantastic. That's a really, I don't think we had that perspective in our initial sort of ideas and sticky notes. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much for adding that one. Awesome. So let's see. Oh, we even have a few more. Good work, everyone. All right. So we have this last slide. So whoever contributed to this slide, did you want to speak as well to any sort of thoughts and perspectives you had here and what influenced these illustrations?
Hi, Aiden. So the illustration on the right is actually reverse migration, which is not a personal experience, but it's during the COVID pandemic in India, a lot of migrant workers from villages that live in cities and work in cities actually walked back to where they're from because they weren't given transportation. And it was this massive crisis that I think everyone in the country felt very close to, because these are people that literally our cities, like they're the heartbeat of the city, and they weren't given the support they needed. And the reason, I know this isn't like climate migration because they're going back to farmland that is not fertile anymore and doesn't have the required biodiversity, and there's water scarcity, which is why they left it in the first place. But I think my biggest takeaway from that was that bigger than the environmental crisis that comes with the climate crisis is the economic crisis that sort of forced them to leave in the first place, and just the value that we attribute as in our economic systems to different things. So the value we attribute to production of mainly things we don't need, as opposed to the value we attribute to farmers and food security and things that should actually be given more value than the things we give value to in this economic system that we're living in. So I think just sort of reimagining that for us to sort of work our way out of this climate crisis, I think is sort of what I was getting at. And the illustration on the left is, I just kind of really liked using the pens. I went a little crazy, but it's storms and just, you know, things worsening. I've actually migrated out of a profession, not because of the climate crisis specifically. There were different attributions, but I used to be an airline pilot, and seeing climate change over, I know we keep saying that it's not here yet, but I feel like if you asked someone that's been like very close to dealing with storms, you know, as part of work, it has definitely increased disproportionately in the last 10 years. So I think people are migrating. I think we're voting with the jobs we want to do. We're voting with the money, where we spend our money and different things, just to sort of, deal with the crisis. But I don't know if it's specifically migration. It's just a mix of everything.
No, that's very, very relevant. And such a fascinating perspective as well to bring to the table. So thank you very much for sharing. I think particularly with your previous work and the way you just said as well, that you've seen that increasing frequency in the sort of storm systems and things like that, pointing to the clear consequences of climate change. And as well, what you mentioned around voting with our feet in terms of what we spend money on, where we want to do our jobs. I think that kind of speaks to a broader point too, where we need governments to kind of recognize that this change is occurring and people are aware of what's going on. And we need economic policy that recognizes the value of the value and also the sort of destruction that other things impose on our society. So, you know, as an example, like plastic is cheap to produce, but we're not taking into consideration the cost to the environment that it also has. And so to your other point around economics, maybe we need to be exploring those opportunities to better reflect the actual cost and the actual value of different systems in our society. Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing, everyone. And your illustrations are all beautiful. That's really, really great. Those are all very salient points to bring to the table in terms of experiences and with your own selves and as well as in your communities. And I think it speaks as well to the point that climate migration in one way or another has affected all of us and will continue to affect all of us. No matter on what scale, there will be some sort of implication that we all face at some point or another. So that's a really interesting takeaway, I think, for me. Excellent. So moving on now to our next key question, we want to explore more about what we've talked about, like what comes to mind when we talk about climate migration, what are our experiences, but now I want us to center around what is it that is most pressing to us? And really, what is it that is the most pressing concern you find in relation to climate migration? And what I'd really encourage when you're adding your stickies here is think quite broadly and think about your own work and your own areas of interest. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be in relation to, you know, people moving and facing safety issues, for example, which is of course important, but it could also be like the perspective we just heard around how, you know, different jobs and different economic consequences. So really kind of think broadly, think outside the box, and we'll spend the next few minutes adding in a few extra stickies around your biggest concerns related to climate migration in the Asia Pacific. We've got some fantastic sticky notes coming through. So things around green jobs, finance, job opportunities, humanitarian crises, overpopulation, cultural conflict. Keep them coming for a couple more minutes. All right, amazing. So keep adding sticky notes if you have more ideas to add. But I think we'll start discussing some of the key themes that we kind of see around our biggest concerns related to climate migration in the Asia Pacific. So I'd love to invite, if anyone has any sort of, from looking at these sticky notes, if there's a key theme or a key message that you can kind of pick out. If anyone has identified one and would like to share, that would be amazing if you could let everyone else know about that. Is there anyone who sees anything in particular, or who from their own experience has a certain perspective on biggest concerns?
May I talk?
Yeah, please do, please do.
Sorry for talking too much.
No,
But yeah,
no.
I added a point which is social tensions and misunderstanding to the bottom left of the questions. So I think that is my biggest concern related to climate migrations in Asia Pacific, because according to from my perspective, I think our regions is not as diverse as other regions in the world. From my community in Vietnam and also in Japan, I feel like there are not so many diversity in the society. We talk with people who use the same language. They all look, they have black hair, black or brown eyes, and there is not so much difference in the society. So in regard of climate migrations, even inside the countries, each region has such different culture and different customs. And when it comes to different region come living and blend with each other, it will create such social tensions and cultural misunderstanding, because they are not used to living in the diverse environments. So now they have to live with climate migration people, and such difference in the culture and the way they live will make them think, oh, maybe those people are bad. Those people, we should not welcome them because they create such problem and they live such different like that. So I think that that problem is very specific to the Asia Pacific region.
Fantastic. Thank you again for sharing that, Dorothy. That's really interesting, I think. So looking at the tension between different people from different cultural backgrounds, and looking at a way potentially that we need to better foster understanding across cultures, and to ensure that climate migrants and all migrants really are able to better integrate into those communities. And we have a really positive narrative that's focused on everyone working as a community rather than vilifying certain groups. Yeah, that's very interesting perspective, and I think a really important concern in the Asia Pacific region. On that topic, does anyone else have a similar sort of concern, maybe from your home country or from a country you've lived in before, on the sort of note of cultural understanding and challenges with migration?
Well, I added few points in the first row. The first one is, let's say that even if a nation has, climate migrant friendly policies in place, it is very difficult to, to prepare ourselves to the influx of migrants. So the forecasting is a big problem. When it comes to the cultural thing, I personally feel like even in nations like India, the primacy is going to be always given to the people who are native citizens of India. And if, say, the climate migrants are from Pakistan or Bhutan or Nepal, then they won't get enough representation in the first place, be it the policy making or their economic rights or social rights. So this is going to be a very big concern, even if we have migrant policies. And I have also added the point of town planning or city planning, because now if, let's say, India is going to accommodate migrants, then that means we have limited resources and more people in place who are not citizens of India. So that again puts India to work on its planning as to how it balances these resources and economic opportunities between its own citizens as well as the migrants. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for those contributions. So I think that from what you said, in the first aspect of what you were talking about, we see that not only can there be sort of cultural tensions, but also tensions between internal and external migrants, and who is prioritized. And we need to make sure that there's space for everyone to be made. Yeah, that's absolutely very, very true. And I think as well, to your second point around forecasting and planning, making sure that we invest now in understanding the scale of this crisis and the scale of what the future holds, so that we can mitigate the potential issues like overcrowding and similar sorts of things. Absolutely. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else have any similar points around planning and forecasting for the future? Any concerns around there? Or even on a totally different note, if you have something else you put up there and wanted to speak to, please share.
Aiden, if I can speak, forecasting and planning, of course, it's extremely important, but I actually wanted to go back to the cultural point. And I was just thinking that more than culture, I feel like, and I mean, this is a big part of culture, but I feel like internally, right now, we're having so much of conflict between religion, minorities in their own countries, that I think that this is going to pose a very big threat to who will be welcome from somewhere else, because I feel like so many people are not even welcome when they are citizens of the country. At like right now, we have a crisis of just, of just even that. So I feel like even in India, especially, we have this. I'm sure the world's watching, but it's extremely distressing because we used to pride ourselves on being a secular nation, which I don't think we are anymore. And I feel like welcoming migrants from countries around, it's a scary thought to think that human beings will have the ability to say, no, you don't have a place to live, no, you can't, I mean, you have nowhere to go. That thought is scary, that where we're giving governments and the whole concept of borders can actually leave somebody homeless. So I just wanted to go back to that.
No, absolutely. Thank you for doing that, because I think that is such a salient point to bring to the table around how, when, like you said, we already have in a lot of places, and it seems in India, as you've mentioned, that we have these religious conflicts that can be obviously an issue in itself, but it can also stem into these other crises we're facing. And like we talked about before, none of these issues exist sort of on their own. And if we're having issues in terms of religious conflict, that also kind of stems into climate migration and who is and who isn't welcome. So do you think that then maybe one of the key ways, I mean, we'll get to this sort of in our next point, but really focusing on fostering religious sort of inclusion and understanding would be critical for the future of migration broadly, but also climate migration?
Yeah, I think when we think about forecasting and planning, we're thinking more infrastructure and tangible things, but this is something intangible that we need to work on now to be ready for 2050, when Bangladesh is, 60% underwater and needs to move somewhere, and we're close, we're similar culturally. So being open to our neighbors to coming here from that have like a religious majority in their country that does not sync up with our country should not be the reason why we leave somebody homeless. So working on these internal things now is really important.
Yeah, fantastic point. And I think what you said as well around not only the sort of forecasting for tangible circumstances, but also intangible elements. And that I think that's a really important takeaway, is that we can think of these things in terms of economic and infrastructure consequences, but we also have to think about the things that we can't measure necessarily in such a concrete way. Fantastic. Thank you for that contribution. Anyone else before we move to our next slide around solutions? Did anyone else want to speak to any of the points that they put up into their sticky notes? And thank you as well to whoever has been organizing them. I really appreciate it.
I guess I also see themes in like sort of the assimilation phase of migration, more specifically with regards to like the job market that they're entering. For example, like in Japan, it's incredibly difficult to like get an entry-level job without any like Japanese language qualifications. And this sort of ties back to like the erasure of like culture and languages, but I feel as though ensuring that these migrants have jobs that they can sort of use to sustain themselves is really important in ensuring that they're like assimilating to the host country in a good way. And I guess this is more geared towards a younger population, but education, I also predict may be a really big issue, especially because in the Asian countries, I guess there's also a culture of collectivism almost. So, you know, if you're part of the in-group, you're sort of accepted, and as opposed to like you being part of like the out group, as some sociologists call it. So there's this large culture of, I guess, having to assimilate into like different groups in a lot of Asian countries. So I feel as though many youths may face a problem in sort of being socially ostracized in school or like youth settings, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes complete sense. So I think from the first sort of part of what you were saying, we need really to focus on, I think, support networks and social systems to make sure that when people do have to be migrating to a different area, that they are able to find employment, and that we've broken down the barriers that may exist to employment, and we've created opportunities for them to use their skills if that's what they're wanting to do. And then I think as well on the sort of education point around ensuring that there's support for people to integrate into the new school systems. And I think the point as well you made around ensuring we don't necessarily have an in-group, out-group mentality. Not only is that important for, you know, climate migration and integration, but also our societies more broadly, you know, whether that be for Indigenous communities, whether that, you know, Indigenous people, LGBTQI plus people, all of these reform ideas have really positive impacts beyond just the scope of climate migration. Fantastic. Let's get one more person to share their thoughts. One more person, and then we'll move on to our solutions for the way forward. No one else wants to share any, even just a quick little sentence or two about what you were thinking with your sticky note?
So may I?
Yeah, please do.
I like the top on the right corner of the sentence, like slow down the development speed or so. And in this sentence, I want to show that if there is a lot of there is a lot of climate change risks in the Asian Pacific countries, many investors will not invest a lot of money in the area or so. So due to the climate change risks, many countries have a lot of opportunity to develop their countries or develop a country. But if a lot of investors recognize the climate change risk also, there will be a limitation in the development speed or the development field or area also. So due to that, the Asian Pacific country will lose their development speed, and they couldn't get fruitful outcome from fruitful outcomes also. So so due to that, many citizens have many citizens have to get out of the country because they couldn't improve their their quality of life also. So yeah, against their citizens, against the nation's desire, some citizens are forced to get out of the citizens also. So this is my thoughts. That's all.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for contributing that. And I think that's a really important point as well around development and climate change, and how if we don't confront climate change broadly, but also climate migration, that does have implications for the ability of a country to develop into the future. And so by addressing these challenges now, we can, as we've sort of mentioned before, we can realize a lot of benefits beyond just the scope of ensuring a really safe and secure environment for everyone, and for migrants in particular. So absolutely, I think that's a fantastic point. Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much for your participation in this one, everyone. Those are really, really interesting points to make. And I think these are the exact things that we want to be hearing about, because with the consultations we're doing, we want to see what is it that you specifically think about when you think about climate migration. What is at the top of your mind? And these sticky notes and these discussions have been really insightful for that. So that's fantastic. We're now going to move on to the last part of today's consultation. And we've kind of discussed now what comes to mind when we think of climate migration, what our experiences have been with this subject area, and what are our biggest concerns in the Asia Pacific region. And now what we want to do is take a future focused lens and look at what do we see as the solutions for the best path forward. So this could be on a broad scale. It could be on a very micro and specific scale. If it's an idea that you have in particular that you think could be really productive, we want you to share all of those different things in the sticky notes again. And then we'll discuss it a bit more too, and see what issue you relate that to and how you think it'll be able to solve it, and where we might be able to implement it and how that could look. So we'll take a few more minutes and just add some more sticky notes on, and then we'll get back into discussing them. Some excellent ideas coming through on big scale policy changes we can make, as well as more community-based initiatives. That's really, really good to see. Keep them coming, and we'll have a few more minutes and then start discussing. All right, fantastic. Keep adding any more ideas as they come to you, and we will start discussing some of these ideas. And for this part, I would really love if you're comfortable for everyone to contribute, because these are all fantastic ideas. And let's kind of work through and develop them a bit further and see where we might want to implement them, how that could look like, because that's ultimately, you know, we want to find a way forward, and these are the solutions that are going to be at the forefront of that. So I think in the top right corner, we can probably start there as a central sort of theme. So we're talking about education, language courses, and storytelling. So if you contributed to those sorts of sticky notes or anything on that theme of education, storytelling, language, did you want to speak to those points and how you see that developing as a solution?
I wrote them. I think for the migration problem, I think education is the most important, because for example, if it's not likely, but for people who does want to come to Japan, in Japan, like almost everyone only speaks Japanese, so they have to learn Japanese first to live in Japan. So I think language is really important, and also education is important, because like today, if I remember correctly, foreign people can't take obligatory schools in Japan. It's not written in the law, so it's possible, but if they don't go to school, it's not gonna be a problem. But I think it's unfair, and so I think free education for everyone is also important.
Fantastic, absolutely. So I think your sort of key theme there is really that education and making it free and accessible for everyone is going to be one of the key ways that we're able to move through this crisis, and that we're able to best ensure that people are able to integrate into these communities. So free and accessible education and language training, that's fantastic. Anyone else on a similar theme or even on a different theme want to share what they added to our sticky notes?
Well, I added on a different theme, because like I said in the previous session, the best time would be now. And the states, you know, they should come, like at least the neighboring states should form bilateral or multilateral agreements between them when it comes to during the times of, you know, crisis, climate crisis, or extreme weather events. They should have a consensus as to how the social rights, the economic rights of the migrants will be protected. Like when I say this consensus should be arrived, it should also include all the stakeholders properly represented during the discussion and negotiation. And the second thing that I added is working on geographical areas. Yeah. So we know the hotspots where this migration or the influx of people will happen, because there are also studies that are going on simultaneously to see which places has more risk and stuff. So these geographical hotspots should be worked on like infrastructurally, and also like finances should be channeled from neighboring nations, like all the nations that are included in this plan. The burden shouldn't be on a one nation, right? So these things might be focused on, like,
Yeah, fantastic. So really, I guess then a key focus for you would be on solutions that look at international collaboration. And so these sorts of bilateral and multilateral agreements ensure that we have plans in place already, and that we know there's a sort of consensus on what the best plan of action is going to be. So in the time that the crisis strikes, we're able to move quickly and effectively.
Exactly. The most efficient part would be the government intervention too. Without governments, if it's going to be, you know, it might not be very efficient, is what I feel.
Yes, absolutely, because that's very true. Ultimately, there's a lot of power that the governments hold. So making sure that those agreements are governmental informed. And also, I think your point around finding the geographical areas which can host climate migrants and climate refugees is also a really salient one, because if we identify those areas now and we're able to integrate those support systems into the communities there already, that again means that that transition can be less difficult, and we don't need to be taking a reactive approach. It can be much more proactive
Yes,
and try to
exactly.
remove some of those barriers.
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those contributions. Anyone else want to join in too and tell us what they added to the sticky notes? Any ideas, big or small?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, so I wrote about the cultural understanding. Because like those migration can sometimes, not sometimes, can be happen internationally, and some people would say like cultural understanding doesn't mean I mean like the cultural understanding doesn't mean like lose the culture or something. People need to like think like how to like live with a different culture. So, and I've heard some of people fear of globalization because they think they're gonna lose their own culture and be in the what is called international, and they tend to be too nationalistic, and sometimes it can be too selfish way to behave. So it can be related to the first person who was talking about the education. So the education can say like how to like live with the different culture doesn't mean lose the culture, but like co-live with them. I'm still like on the way to summarize or go for conclusion, but that's my idea.
No, I think that is fantastic. So really looking, it seems from your perspective, at sort of fostering an understanding that multiple cultures can coexist and we can all kind of exist together, and it doesn't have to be one or the other, and that we need to sort of foster that welcoming environment. It looks like Dorothy, did you want to add to that point too?
Yeah, sure. But if you want to finish your talk, you can continue to talk, and I can talk later.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm
sorry for interruptions, but this point is quite related to Ayako-san point. So I wrote see migration as opportunities, and from that point we implement policies to support climate migrants. So the thing here I see from most of the points here are we are holding a quite negative perspective on climate migrants. We see them as someone who really needs support, need help from them, and that kind of climate migration group will somehow, I mean, from the perspective of a host country, they will need our investment, need our money to help them, and also time and effort. So they need help. But I think it's necessary for us to see migration, in this case, climate migrants, as opportunities for the countries, because if we invest, I was use the word invest in education for them, teaching them the language, and also educate them about the culture in the host country, they can contribute really meaningfully to the country development, the country as well. Let's say, for example, Japan is having a shrinking population, right? So the population is aging, and there's not enough labor force in the country. So in this sense, migrants will help to boost the economy of the countries by adding more labor force to the country. So yeah, I just want to say that it's very important to see it as an opportunities rather than obstacle and challenge that we have to overcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I think that's such an important point, really. So it seems like from your perspective, we need to focus on reshaping the narrative from one where, you know, the host country is giving and giving and giving,
Yes.
into one where we recognize that the migrants are also giving and giving and giving, and they bring a lot to the table as individuals, and a lot of cultural knowledge and a lot of skills and experiences, that if we work together, we can have a lot of shared value from collaborating. That's a really important point. Fantastic. Does anyone have anything to add on that sort of note? Or again, oh, we have a raised hand. I can't. Oh, yes. Excellent.
Hi, Aiden. I actually wanted to add to what Dorothy said, and my sticky note is the storytelling one on the right, and basically reshaping the narrative, because we keep hearing about migration as a very negative thing, like she mentioned, and reshaping it so that we talk about the successful stories of migrants not needing that help and actually contributing to the host country. And I've put Madeleine Albright here as an example. She was displaced during the Hungarian crisis and ended up being the Secretary of State in the United States. So, I mean, a lot of Fortune 500 companies have been formed by migrants. So I just think recognizing that they're actually an asset to a host country, because there's an economist, I can send you his name later, I forget who he is, but he wrote about how he compared migrants to when women were entering the workforce and how everyone was very afraid that there were only limited jobs, and now there was a whole new group of people that were going to come and fight for those jobs, but actually it added value to the entire system. So looking at that as a value adding mechanism is one. And then another point that I wanted to raise was just like asking the United Nations to first and foremost to recognize climate migrants officially, which they haven't done yet, without which we can't really work on any policy to move forward.
Fantastic. Though I think that's such an amazing addition to what we were talking about just before. So really around what you said as well, in particular with sort of like Fortune 500 companies being built by migrants, Madeleine Albright as an example as well in the position she held as Secretary of State. And so I think another key theme, I guess, that's emerging from our discussion today is really we need to see all of the benefits and opportunities that lie in this space, and that we need to kind of move away from maybe this sort of savior narrative around, you know, look at all these great things we're doing for you as the host country, which there certainly are productive things being done, but we also need to recognize how much migrants are bringing to the table and how much they contribute to the goodness we have in our societies. Absolutely. And I think to your point around the official recognition of climate migrants, that was certainly something that we heard from a previous consultation, was that until we kind of have formal recognition, that it's going to be really challenging to create productive change in this space. And I think that's very similar to what you mentioned before. So excellent. Anyone else have anything they want to add to around sort of official recognition or policy advocacy? We have quite a few things like that up here. Does anyone want to speak to those points? Or oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, this is really short, and it sort of goes back to what Haruki was saying about education, but I feel as though there has to be very like concrete policy mechanisms to ensure that children aren't lagging behind in education, specifically in more the migration phase of things, where people are staying in refugee camps or like encampments for like months at a time. And I think there has to be some sort of policy or law in place to ensure that they don't lag behind in terms of education, and that there aren't additional burdens like to pre-existing ones, such as, you know, the language barrier or issues with financial stability when they finally arrive at the host country. But yeah, that's it.
Absolutely. And I think that touches what you've just said as well on another theme that kind of has emerged from this discussion around the importance of education, and not only the importance of like language training, but also schooling and feeling welcome at school, particularly for young people who experience migration, and the importance that education has in setting people up for a successful and prosperous life, and that we need to make sure that those fundamentals are secured, particularly for migrant communities, and that they don't fall through the gaps in our societal systems, because with that education, there are so many opportunities that can lie ahead. That's fantastic. Excellent. Anyone else before we wrap up want to add any other points, any contributions or ideas that they've added?
Yeah, may I?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, in terms of an approach, like to move forward this climate migration issue ahead, I think it's important. I think the bottom-up approach between the approach from the citizen and NGO or youth is so important. This is because because the business sector will be reluctant to participate in this action. This is because the companies will pursue their profits or their benefits, but in terms, but on this climate migration, there is maybe now there isn't established any system, so companies will did not expect to get benefit from participating in this activity or so. So I think the youth or non-governmental organization or UN activity movement to push government to take action against these policy is so important and inevitable to move forward this activity. Yeah, this is all my opinion. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So really investing then, I think, in grassroots activists and grassroots movements in the climate migration space, because as you mentioned, so often larger corporations have their interests at heart at the end of the day. And with governments and other bodies investing in the people who are doing the sort of work and who have the lived experience and who are out there fighting every day for the rights of migrants and the rights of climate migrants, I think that's such an important point, that's why we need to be investing into the future, because that's where the most concrete change is going to be happening by those sorts of activists. Absolutely. Wonderful. Thank you again to whoever is organizing. A shout out to you. If you'd like to remain anonymous, that's fine. But thank you for making it look very nice. So that is the last of the sort of formal questions that I wanted us to go through today. But I'd just like to open the floor now, before we wrap up properly, to see if there's any sort of takeaways, reflections, closing remarks that anyone has on our discussion today, or maybe something that's changed your perspective, or a way you want to move forward after our discussion. Does anyone have anything they would like to share?
Thank you so much for organizing this very informative and insightful roundtable. So I learned so much from this roundtable discussions, and also I was able to see many perspectives of other young people as well. For the time being, our team, like, we are divided into many task forces, and we work together. But after I experienced this roundtable with other members, other teams, I feel like there's a need for inter-team discussion as well in every theme. So to make sure that we will not overlook any of the important points that should be mentioned in the National Youth Statesman of Japan. But yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And I think that's very true in all the things we discuss in this space, and also just, more broadly when we talk about these sorts of challenges and the way forward, always focusing on that cross-team collaboration, because that's when we can ensure no one falls through the cracks, and we're making sure we get everyone's perspective. So that sounds like a very positive way forward. Any other closing remarks from anyone? Anything you wanted to share?
But I would say that the session was really helpful in terms of understanding why a teamwork and an inclusive environment should be, because I was able to witness how all of us complemented each other's perspectives. And also, Aiden, you moderated this very well, and thank you for that too.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very, very kind of you. And I think that's a very, very true point. This has been such an incredible discussion. And the fact that you're exactly right, everyone's ideas really do complement each other. And even if we have different perspectives on where priorities lie or what needs to be kind of action first, at the end of the day, we all have the same interests at heart, and we all have the same key priorities that we want to see change in this space. And we're really sick of inaction, and we want climate migration to be really at the forefront of the table. So that's very, very positive way to end. Anyone else, any closing remarks before we finish off?
I have a little remark. I'm just grateful for the session. I learned a lot from everyone on this call. And like everyone said, Aiden, you moderated it really well, and we had a chance to really open up and discuss. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Again, I think the success of this session and the ability to have all of these different ideas and perspectives, I attribute it really to all of you, because I know it's tricky sometimes to open up on Zoom and to share our different ideas, but everyone being so welcoming and creating this safe environment for us to share perspectives and being really engaged and contributing to this discussion. This is such an important part of the way we find a path forward as young people, and that we're able to create the future that we want to see by sharing these ideas and collaborating and working together to advocate for change. So thank you again to everyone for your really meaningful participation. I think that's a really nice note to end on. Thank you once again, and on behalf of myself and the Migration Youth and Children platform, this has been an incredible session, and all of these findings are going to be implemented into a COP27 side event. So there'll be